And the equilibrium is what's key here. Equilibrium is matching the school's budget to those tax revenues. When tax revenues are going to drop, if we can't cut the costs, we're out of equilibrium. And that's been a concern, are we out of equilibrium or not? So we're going to talk about that, and it's in several categories. That blue line here is equilibrium. If we're not making our budget, we're going to be down at the bottom part of the graph. If we're above, then we're positive. The first thing that happened was in 2010, between three different types of funding cuts, we lost at the school $3.3 million of funding. In the second year, 2011, we fully expect another $5.6 million in funding cuts, bringing us to $8.9 million in the hole, which is the previous slide that we just saw. So the school did a fantastic job, we think, as Mike and Dr. Robinson referred to, taking out some costs that needed to be taken out of the school system to the tune of $3.8 million in annual recurring costs, and that's been able to make up a good part of the shortfall. That put us to $5.1 million negative. At that point, the school system said, stop, we're done, we can't cut anymore, and we need a referendum of $5.8 million a year to make up this shortfall. Okay, this gets a little complicated, but we'll talk about the circuit breaker, which is the same name as the tax caps first. That's going to take us $2.4 million, now $2.5 million reduction in funding to the school. Well, after talking to the tax and social Gumball CPA firm that prepared the estimates, we found out there's two components to that $2.4 million. First, there's an actual loss to the school of $900,000 cash because the state government was subsidizing through a levy replacement and through a homestead credit. They were subsidizing the phase-in of that tax cap. So next year, the school is going to lose $900,000. The second part is an increase that the school won't get because as the tax rate goes up and they ask for more, most of us are at a 1% cap, we won't pay any more tax. So think about it this way. An employee is making $50,000. He goes into his boss and says, I need a $2,000 raise, I need a good job. And the boss says, well, you are doing a good job, but the economy's tough. In fact, we had to cut your pay $1,000. He really lost $1,000, but the school calls that a $3,000 cut. So we correct the circuit breaker to $1.4 million difference, $1.5 million difference between what's actually going to be lost and an increase they won't get. And now we're $3.6 million in the hole. Now this next one is the biggest single item here we need to be sure of. There's $3.8 million of annual costs. Mike referred to 120 positions. There's been 3 pages of cost reductions that have been detailed in the budget book by the board, etc. Those cost reductions are out of the system and they won't repeat. So when you correct the $3.8 million of cost reductions in 2011, we've only accounted for 1 year up to now. 2 years, that gets us back to actually a little bit positive. The teachers did do a concession to give up part of their raise for one school year, the current school year. That's a one-time concession, and that expires next year from now. But that did add $1 million to the cash flow for the corporation. And finally, we found 2 items buried in the budget book where there are actually some funding increases to offset the funding decreases. There's a restoration grant for $551,000 from the state. They gave all schools because they recognized they were cutting funding, and they gave some of it back. That's in the budget. Plus, with 80 new students this year, we get $5,396 per student. That's over $400,000 more. So there's almost $1 million of additional funding that's in the budget when we go collect. That gets us to $2.3 million. Better than zero. Just a couple of quick news clips. Governor Daniels, it's tough to predict the state economy, but he's optimistic about the cuts that were enacted this year. He won't have to go any deeper next year. So the $1.5 million is expected, as of now, to be what we will be deducted in 2011. And that's in the budget. And there's also a stimulus that's been announced recently. Zionsville will receive just over $1 million. We recognize that we need to hold that money in reserve for maybe a half a that money will become available. We're not counting on it, it's not in the budget, but it's a pretty good possibility. I think I'm going to turn this over now to Jeff, and we'll move on with some more comments.
Here's the slide that I would show a rather altered form, but it's the 2010 cash flows, and the left side of it is the total receipts, the right side is total disbursements. And we went through this with Mike and Dr. Robinson and Sherry Ritchie today, just to make sure that we were looking at it correctly. The green part of this slide is actual results for June. The blue slide is projected through the end of 2010. On the receipt side, Mike's projecting in 2010, the school will bring $32,700,000 total. On the right side of the disbursements category, he's projecting that the school will spend $32,650,000. This is the general fund. The year started with a cash balance of almost $2.3 million. This shows a slight surplus in funding overspending and an ending cash balance of $2,330,000. Moving to 2011, same information, again, projection by Mike. Budget balances and budgeted cash flows for next year. You see total receipts expected at $32.8 million, total expenditures at $33.6 million, and again we started with end of the year 2010 with $2.3 million. This actually shows spending in excess of funding, so there's a $764,000 reduction in cash, but this cash balance is still $1,565,000 as the projected at the end of the year. Mike put this together, and one thing about Mike is we all know that budgets have inherent uncertainties, and we actually commended Mike, as did Dr. Robinson, because he does a really good job of putting his budget together. He has a very good record over the last 13 years of pegging these things. And this is what Mike says about these two pages that we just showed you. That the budget that you just saw is the most probable outcome. It's neither a worst case or a best case scenario, and it should be adequate for our cash flow needs. Now it's true, it could be off. One might argue, well, it could be much better. What we showed you could be much better than what next year is. It also could be much worse. We don't know. That's basically what our position is that we need, the referendum is too early, it's too much money, we got plenty of cash, and we'll move into that. There's 4 funds that have cash in them that we think the board could look at and making sure we get through next year, if those projections you just saw are. General funds got $2.3 million in it. The federal stimulus money will be in soon at $1 million. Capital projects funds got $2.3 million in it, and the rainy day fund has $3.6 million. So Ron and I are conservative accountants too, and we don't want to run out of money. That would be a bad thing, although I'm sure the school has short-term borrowing abilities that had to, but I can't see any method or way that they chew through $9 million. So we believe they're in a position in very good shape, and that the referendum is too early and too much money.